Hi, my name is Mike Snow, and welcome back to the Dark Souls Barbarian build. An apology first. It has been a long time since I put one of these videos out, and it's been many months, and that is because I was going through a lot of recording issues originally, and then I just really got distracted by Bloodborne and then Fallout 4, and as time went on, the farther you get away from something, the more you don't want to go back. Delenn in Babylon 5 once said that the longer it's been since you told a lie, the more you don't want to revisit it, and the more ashamed you are of it. And that's kind of how I feel about this, because I said, I was going to do this, and more time passed, and I just kept feeling worse and worse that I wasn't doing it, and it just took a while. But anyway, we're back to the Barbarian build here. Coming back to Dark Souls 1, I think it'd give me a good chance to explain my feelings a bit about Dark Souls 3 here, and Dark Souls 1 really is a much slower game. It's so much more relaxed, so much more calm, and obviously graphically Dark Souls 3 is better, but really in terms of the artistry, it's really no different at all from this game. They both look fantastic. Dark Souls 3 is just more advanced. It's interesting to go back to the slowness of this game and how calm and withdrawn and sort of leisurely you can take the game, especially after Bloodborne, which in almost every case is really just a wild scramble to do anything. And after many months of playing it, I really just am still kind of at a loss. I still sort of wildly flail about, a little bit like the enemies in that game. It is kind of refreshing to come back to Dark Souls 1 and just sort of much more calmly play. Even this is the most relaxed of all the games. Even Demon Souls, you had a kind of floatiness, I think, to your character that encouraged you to leap and roll around a lot more swiftly than in this game, where you can, it's really the only game where you can take your time and play a slow, heavy character without much of a penalty. The other games I don't think did that very much. Marvelous Chester reminds me a lot of these Bloodborne guys. I guess it's a little bit of a joke that he looks so much like the Bloodborne people because they were working on that game as they were making this. I wish you can do that kick. I really wish that you can play a kind of martial artist character and fight with your hands and feet a lot more successfully. Bit disappointed you couldn't do that in any of the Fallout games, really. I've tried martial arts builds in New Vegas and 4, and they really just don't come out looking too good, to be honest. I loved how this area is collapsed. There's no huge swirling abyss below that has a lot of energy to it. It's just sort of an empty blackness, and it's very faintly rotting away and presumably gravitically being pulled under the ground here. I actually like this little secret zone here. The Dark Souls games are fantastic for including weird places that are totally out of the norm, and they actually work and spend time on them and do them, and they spend so much time on something that's really hidden. Whereas in another game, I really don't think they would ever do that, like in Dark Souls 3, where you can... going to be spoiling some Dark Souls 3 here. Now that I think I'll put that in the description. But in Dark Souls 3, an entire area of the game is encountered through a gesture, of all things, that you find and can get through an optional boss, so that's really exciting. These horrendous tentacled monsters actually remind me a little bit of some Bloodborne-ish creatures somehow. Just with their long, grasping hands. I really love this giant stone axe. There's actually a song online called by a band called Stone Axe, called Slave of Fear. It's a hard rock band from the early 70s. It's really good. I think these treasures are looted for some reason or another. I'm not sure who it was that took them. I kind of forget that part of the lore, but I like that you find empty chests here in the DLC, just like you do in the Dark Souls 2 DLC in Crown of the Sunken King. This whole area is just absolutely beautiful, because we get to go back in time and see another really just gorgeous landscape. Of all the games, Demon Souls had the best in terms of atmosphere. But I think Dark Souls 1 even had better atmosphere even than Bloodborne. Because in Dark Souls 1, you really do get this kind of, at least I do, this soothing sensation of just relaxation as you're marching through the ruins of a world that was. I've mentioned this before, but I think it bears repeating that I really love the idea of you playing this game as an archaeologist going back through huge, empty landscapes. I really don't like the idea of a narrative-based game. And I think that this is a terrible decision that people have made over the past 10 to 15 years, where they're just sucking the knobs of the movie industry. At one point in the 1930s, when sound totally revolutionized how we make movies, we changed how they were made for a long time. In the early years, the first 20-25 years of silent cinema, it was pretty clear that we saw film as the visual, unique medium that it was. And even though it was very primitive technologically, it was its own unique art form, outside of other influences as much as possible. But during the 1930s, during the dark days of the early silent era, everything changed, and I feel that it changed for the worse. It changed because it became a kind of imitation, or a crude imitation of plays, of the theater, because at the time people saw theater acting and the world of drama as a superior art form. And of course it's not superior or inferior, it was just around for much longer, so it had a greater pedigree of importance to civilization. But they began to ape what had gone on in drama, in movies for a long time, and it was many decades before they were able to break out of that ridiculous moment where they were trying to sort of acting almost like a theatrical filmed play in a way, in those eras where the sound stages became sort of boring, dull, everything sort of downgraded from the fantastical look of the early horror and science fiction movies especially. But even in the more blasé movies like Sunrise, a famous silent movie, it just looks better because the poetry of the movie is done so much better without the interference of the screenplay, of the play acting at all. And something similar, unfortunately, is, I believe, happening in video games. What's been going on is that the video game industry was like the movie industry early on in the latter part of the 20th century. It was an entirely unique art form. It was an art form completely unto itself that that obviously took things from other art forms, but when people made them, they knew, partially because of technological limitations, that they couldn't make them adequate representations of other media, so they couldn't ape other things. But then 3D technology became more pronounced, it became more easy to use, it became more and more part of the industry, and then the movie aping began. The people began to try to make their video games like movies. Ironically, just like movies were tried to, where people tried to influence movies with the theater, movies have exerted a baleful influence on another genre, video games, which should be on their own and unique. And the reason that I love video games, and I was so angry when I died here, I really almost threw my controller. But anyway, I digress. Video games before this time, when I say this time, I mean the early to mid-2000s, were so technologically limited that you couldn't really make them look like a movie. And the only time they tried that before that was with the FMV, the full motion video era, which is ridiculous and comic, and highly worth checking out for its ridiculousness. They weren't really capable of making movies. they were capable of making video games and influencing them with movies, which is how you should do it with any genre. It's its own unique beast. And then in the early 2000s, people began to make the movie games, the Metal Gear Solid type games, the cutscene games, the games in which character interaction and dialogue were much more like you were filming a play or something like that. You were watching a film of something go by. And that's not video games to me. Video games in the early era were not limited by their by not being like movies. They were benefited by that because people could really develop how you should tell a video game story, which is primarily based on the action of the player, not the person making the game. Whether you're a filmmaker or you're a writer or you're a playwright, you are telling a story. You are in charge of what the story is, whether you're the screenwriter or the director. You are the one that is telling the audience what is happening and telling what's going on. Now, there's always room for interpretation, and typically a director is considered better if his interpretation is bigger, more complicated, and more available to interpretation by being unique and not easy to pin down, and I agree with that. However, ultimately, you're the one that's telling the story. In a video game, you should not be the one telling the story. The player should be the one accessing the story. The gameplay is separate from the story, and if they want to interact with the story, they should be able to do that. And you can make a fantastic story. But that's why Fallout is such a magnificent series, because you are the one that gets involved in the story, and you as the player get into the role partially of the storyteller, because you collaborate with the creator of the story in choosing what happens in that world, not only to your character, and in some ways you can design your own character at the very beginning, not just in a role-playing game sense, but in who the character is, how he interacts with others, and what they're going to do with the world, and you can learn and speculate on the story yourself. And that is how to make a video game. I'm sorry to be so declarative there, and not leaving a lot of room for nuance, but that is, I think, how you should make a successful video game, rather than just being a frustrated movie maker. Last year, it was over a year ago now, I played a terrible game called Tomb Raider, Lara Croft, Rise of the Tomb, or something. It was the remake of the Tomb Raider series, or the reboot of the Tomb Raider series. And it was terrible. I mean, when I say terrible, I don't mean it was like painfully awful. I just mean it wasn't any good. It wasn't worthwhile. It wasn't like Michael Bay movie terrible, where it's like painful to sit through. It's just not very fun to watch or engage with at all. And I played through the game because it was, I only got it because it was an Xbox Live games with gold thing, and I didn't have any games to play at the time, so I thought, well, I'm already paying for this, I might as well try it. And I played through the entire game, and it was pretty horrid. There was very little in the way of freedom. Even though the game made a pretense to it, it was a very faint and badly done pretense to you interacting with the series. You couldn't really change the character of Lara very much. You couldn't really interact with the world to alter it permanently very much. You were just part, you should never, when you design a game, say to yourself, okay, I'm going to make the person playing this game into an actor, and I'm going to give him direction. That is not the way to make a movie, I'm sorry to say. When you're making a film, that's what you're supposed to do. You're a director or you're a screenwriter, and it's your job to create the character that the main actor is playing. In a video game, that's not what you should do. You should not say, I'm just going to order the main character around and tell them, okay, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, this is going to go on here, that's what's going to happen there, then you move here, then you touch this, then you talk to him, then you go over here. There can be some light direction, obviously, in a video game. You know, in New Vegas, you get told to, you go talk to Mr. House, whatever it is. In Fallout 4, there's a little bit too much direction, but still, it was very much a free game, just not as much as the previous Fallout ones. However, in this new Tomb Raider game, sometimes in a narrative sense, and sometimes even in a physical sense while playing, I really felt like I was an actor being directed in a role. That's what I felt like. I felt like, oh boy, I'm going to be told what to do by this person who's in command of the story. The job of the game creator should be to design a world, a playground in which you can create your story. And you can add all sorts of fascinating story elements to the world, but you're designing a landscape, you're designing a world that the character is going to have to interact with. You're not there designing this game to be a set narrative that the person is just going to follow. There can be a plot like in Fallout 4, but the plot is barely extant. It's virtually non-existent, having played the game many times now. You don't need to condescend to the plot to even care about the game. You can do things without getting involved with it at all, or not really caring about it. But in this Tomb Raider game, my goodness, you were just thrown down into this path. They made such a big deal about the voice acting and the movements of the faces on the characters. I don't even like voice acting in movies. I would prefer there to be, in movies, in video games, I prefer there would be slim to none in terms of voice acting, all of which you should be able to skip, and really only used in the most dire, plot-heavy parts of the story. The rest of it should just be your character, it should be your inner voice reading your character's dialogue. That is what it should be. You should be able to design what's going on. You become a designer when you play a video game in a way, because the way in which you interact with the world becomes part of the world, and you should always be saying to yourself, how well how many paths did I give to the person playing? How many ways to play did I give to the person? How many times can they go back to this and play it again? But in this Tomb Raider game, oh my god. It was, first of all, it was so short, and I feel like that old, Borscht Belt joke about, like, the food here is terrible. Yeah, and in such small portions. But I'll say it anyway. The game was very short, which is strange because I didn't like it, but, the game itself was like 12, 13 hours, maybe? That's pathetic. That's not enough for $60 of entertainment. That is absolutely not enough for $60 worth of entertainment, when there are other games I have where I can play hundreds and hundreds of hours and still get enjoyment out of them. And most importantly of all, a game is meant to be played more than once. Now, this is a little bit more controversial, but I think that the hallmark of a good game is replayability. You should be able to play it 10, 20, 30 years later, not just play it one time and then leave. There are movies like that where, I watch them just one time and I enjoyed it and I move on. But I don't think they're particularly good movies. They're at best average. And I only pay 10-something for a movie these days, although it's likely to go up soon. But with a video game where you're paying the $60, you should have a lot of reinvestment of time that you can put back into the game. And this Tomb Raider game, my goodness, it's just painful. The voice actor playing Lara was not very good, and there's this ludicrous scene. I don't want to try to explain it to you because you just have to hear it. But she suddenly goes on a killing spree and starts massacring all of the gunmen that are always hanging around Lara Croft for some reason or another. And just the way she says it in this ridiculous, very prim and proper British accent, like the upper crust British accent. And she almost sounds like she's trying to be polite while saying it. She's like, oh, I'll kill you. Oh. I know that sounded ridiculous, and I apologize for it, but you just have to see it. Just look up, Lara Croft. I'm not sure what to look it up, but there's a scene where she's sort of racing around a village, gunning down people in the game, and her voice acting is so horrid and so cringeworthy, I could not even pretend to take the game seriously after that. The puzzle elements of the game are not very good. And you're also just sort of guided, press, like, jump here, do this, put your torch there, do that. You feel like there's an invisible hand around you all the time, just ordering, just, you have to do this, do that, go here, do this. Sometimes they literally do that in video games. In fact, they do that all the time, even in good video games, where they have some guy in, like in Dead Space or Bioshock, where they have some guy in an intercom saying, okay, move here, now do that, then go over here. It's painful, and so many of the jumping and climbing or parkour-esque segments, you really felt just like an actor or a gymnast being ordered around by some angry coach. Just, okay, go there, now put this, now put your hand there, now put your hand over here, now go left, now go to the other side, now go to the right side, now try this. It's so boring and so ridiculous and so absurd, I just can't take it. I just can't take it at all. It's painful, and I despise it. It's such a horrible thing to see all of this. But getting back to the Dark Souls games and what makes them different. The reason the Dark Souls games are good, the reason that they're different and better games, is that they're not narrative games. They're not from fiction. They're not, when I say fiction, I mean they're not from fiction writing. They're history writing. Now, I'm a big fan of history. I read every day, but I virtually never read fiction. It's very rare. I think I reread Rendezvous with Rama and The Number of the Beast a few months ago when I was getting into a bit of a sci-fi kick. But I predominantly, 99% of the time, read history books. And that's what Dark Souls is. It's a history book in a video game. And video games are uniquely capable of putting you in the shoes of an archaeologist or a historian. And they allow you to be in the role of someone trying to investigate something. Like there's a mystery, which is it's another element. It adds its mystery. Why did this civilization collapse? What language did they speak? What buildings did they make? Is there any evidence that their buildings were destroyed for any reason or another? What happened to these people? They were here, they built this, why aren't they there now? Did any of the current inhabitants have any clues as to what happened to them? There are snippets and little bits here and there of history that you can read and learn about from examining relics. It's just like an archaeologist picking up an old sword. You can pick up an old sword and say, you can learn a little bit, just a little bit, a couple sentences of information about that civilization. And you're never going to know everything. We're never going to know everything about ancient Babylon or ancient Egypt, no matter how much we read. We weren't there, and the records are never going to be detailed enough. We're never going to know perfectly, but we can get into that role of figuring it out, of trying to understand who these people are, where they came from, why they did the things that they did, what made them tick, what did they believe, what god did they worship. Just like figuring out about Gwendolyn and Gwyn and Guinevere. What was their religion like? Was their religion a sham? Was there some truth to it? Were the gods honest and just in their religion? How do they create morality and laws? We can learn all of those things. What is considered a sparse story is a brilliant historical narrative to me that I would read in a book about ancient Greece or ancient Sumer or something like that. And it's just absolutely magnificent to have a game like that. And the Fallout games are a lot like that too, where we learn about history. That is more on a level frequently of individual history, where we find like the audio playbooks or diary entries in the Fallout 3, New Vegas 4 era. But there's also history elements in the first two games, especially where we have to, sort of piece together the world. That's exactly like the Silent Hill games I love so much. We can piece together in Silent Hill 1 the history of what happened in this town and this cult. Are these people any good? We can observe ourselves. We are taking an active role in the story. It's not a passive thing. We're not sitting around a campfire and someone's telling us something. It's an active event. We have to engage with the world in order to figure out what's going on. And it should be more rewarding for the people that do that, but you shouldn't have to. You should be able to crash around this place like a vicious barbarian. And being a barbarian really makes me think of how magnificent it would have been to actually be a Goth or a Frank or one of the Vikings perhaps, but especially earlier on in the Goths or Franks in the 4 or 5 or 6 or 700s, or maybe the Anglo-Saxons, and you could march around in the decaying cities and villas and look at the amphitheaters. This looks like amphitheater pillars in the background here in Goth's chamber, and just sort of examine what the world is like. The barbarians, curiously enough, almost immediately after they destroyed the ancient world, one of the first things that they did was try to piece it together. That's what they wanted to do. They destroyed Rome and then immediately set about building it and created a Holy Roman Emperor a few hundred years later that lasted a millennia, as long as Rome. They were so fascinated and mystified by the world that they shattered that they wanted to be a part of it. They wanted to bring it back for other people. They wanted to create that world yet again. And that's what they did. And this right here is just a huge, huge mistake that went on, because I stupidly thought that I could leap back into this, after not playing for about 5 months, and just trash Kalameet naked with only 20 vitality. Usually, more sensibly, you'd have about 40 vitality, the max, before the soft cap max, I mean. And, well, things did not go as they planned, and this is just a little montage of me being shreked by Kalameet before I eventually break down and just, leveled up my health a couple of points, and then started to use a shield, which is against what I originally wanted to do many months ago, but it was either that or not continue the run, because I could not defeat Kalameet. What would have been a bagatelle 4 months ago is a Herculean challenge right now, because I've been playing so many other games, and, so much of playing is just the sense memory of knowing exactly when to get things going, and I just could not do it, unless I used a shield. But anyway, as I was saying, it's so important to me to have those history-based games rather than those literature or traditional story or play-based games. And playing as a barbarian, why do we fantasize about being a barbarian? What is it about it? It's the freedom. Because whether you're a barbarian here or a raider, savage in one of the Fallout games, you are free. There is no central authority. You can do whatever you want to anyone. You can have fun. You could go wherever you go. You don't have to stand. You don't have to get up out of bed when everyone tells you have to get up out of bed. You can do whatever you damn well please. That's what the barbarian is about. It's about freedom. And playing a barbarian in these games, I really wish there were more aesthetic ways I could go about it. More barbaric waistcloths, or some kind of just barbaric armor, helmets, because this is really a game that you can be a barbarian the most out of any game I can think of, to be honest. This game, just makes you free. It makes you a barbarian. You can picture yourself wandering around the ruins of some Roman villa that was sacked by the Goths or the Huns, and you can be a totally free person. And that is just so exhilarating and so wonderful that I really want that to be more a part of games than it is now. I don't want games to go through a period like they did in the 30s and 40s, where they withdrew from the visual excitement of the earlier era, where they withdrew from realizing how magnificent their genre was, and how unique it was, and how magnificent this medium really is, and how it's totally its own, and just tried to ape a more successful medium. And I also have to mention that part of the reason that happened is not just technology. but it became so much more mainstream, just as gaming has become more mainstream. And so in order to legitimize it and go after this phantom, bigger audience, and I say phantom because I don't think that audience is really there to stay or really likes the games. They're only there in order to get a small amount of extra bucks. I think that most gamers really want the games that I'm talking about, the freedom games. Look how huge Fallout was, what a huge game Skyrim was. I didn't really care for Skyrim, or really the Elder Scrolls games in general, but they were free games. You could do what you want. You could build a life. You chose how you interacted with the story. It could have been better because they could have more clearly shaped a definitive change to the world, which was not forthcoming in Fallout 4. But in the Dark Souls games, you really are, so liberated to act, to do what you want. In a physical sense as well. I've spoken about this before, about how free you are as a character in the Dark Souls games. Just when you move, you really feel like, and that brings me back to Tomb Raider, when you were moving around with the character, you felt ridiculous. It felt like you had these weird, like, ball and chains on the end of your ankles when you tried to move. They tried to make it more realistic, and they ended up just making it bad game design. If the people who actually made Tomb Raider were real video game fans, they would have known that that was a bad idea, because there were games like that, like, what was it called, Flashback or Flash Forward or something, and Blackthorn, which was made, I think, by Blizzard years ago, in the early 90s, where they tried to make the characters move more realistically, more as actual, they would emulate like actual people, and it was terrible. It was terrible even in Prince of Persia, which is regarded as a great game, even though I think it's terrible. It should not be realistic. It should be strange and unique and different, and you need to be able to break the rules a little bit and just have your character move simply, not ridiculously like they do in the Assassin's Creed games, also by Ubisoft, just like Tomb Raider, where you sort of move around weirdly, stiffly. It was described by the show Zero Punctuation as movement is like trying to kick a sack of potatoes down the street. It's so clunky and difficult. It was terrible. But, these games are perfect for Barbarian fodder. And they're perfect for fantasizing about being a free, tough bastard living out somewhere in the wilderness. Being a barbarian is about embracing freedom. And if you want to embrace freedom, as you'll notice in virtually any fiction, especially A Boy and His Dog that talks about it, which was a seminal moment in the creation of the Fallout games, in order to embrace freedom, what do you have to do? You have to embrace danger. And that's what these games are doing. They get you to embrace danger more fully, but you also embrace freedom when you do that. You become more free when you embrace the danger. You can't avoid one or the other.
Thou hast defeated Kalameet, wondrously played. Lord Gwyn's blessing upon thee. That beast will never take to the skies again. Dragons shall never be forgotten. We knights fought valiantly, but for every one of them, we lost 70 of our own. Exhilaration, pride, hatred, rage. The dragons teased out our dearest emotions. Thou will understand one day. At our twilight, old thoughts return in great waves of nostalgia. This great bow, I shan't need it, but no dragons to hunt. I know not if a human could even operate it, but here, thy need outweighs mine. I suspect thou hast taken a gander at it, but the dark of the abyss, which swallowed poor Artorias, threatens to devour our entire land of Elysium. It seems that this dire fate is unavoidable, but seduced by a dark serpent or no, they awoke that thing themselves and drove it mad. One's demise is always one's own making. Farewell, proud human. May every honor be bestowed upon thee.
So what better way to conclude this story about freedom in a game than by murdering one of the best characters in the game? Aside from Solaire, I think Golf is the best character in the game, to be honest. He's incredible. The way he speaks and just the emotions that he gives. You don't have some sort of huge, complicated story with a boring structure that you would see in another game, even the Fallout games. He's just a magnificent character that you interact with briefly, powerfully, and brilliantly. When he says that he was once a great hero like you, but when you first talk to him, he says, "Go away, mortal." Or when you leave him, he says, "Go, mortal, leave your life as thou see fit." That's the most important thing that I can think of for a barbarian. Live your life as you see fit to do so. I was once beholden as a knight to other people, to other men, to their wishes, to their needs, their desires. You as a human, you live your life the way that you want to live it. Not in any other way. You will have total freedom. And you have freedom in these games, which you need. And they're going to be more dangerous. They're going to be more deadly. We're living in a world where you can die very easily. Not as easily as in the real world, but still pretty damn quickly. And to show this is so important for these games. To show how dangerous and how liberating that danger is. To be free. To be a barbarian. To live in a world without order, without structure, without rules, without regulations. To wander around in the barely ordered early medieval landscape is something that any barbarian should want to do. It's exciting, it's fun, and it is truly liberating. It is truly free. You can live your life as you see fit. You don't have to follow orders as someone else. You don't have to order around others yourself. You don't even have companions. It's just you. And that is so relaxing and so fun that you could be killed at any moment is not worrying. That's not something that I'm scared of. That's something that exhilarates me. And it frees me and calms me in a way. I'm more calm when I don't have to follow somebody else's rules than I would be if I was totally and utterly safe. That's a story that's told in A Boy and His Dog brilliantly. A movie that was vastly influential to the Fallout series. And I want there to be more games like Dark Souls, more games where I can truly be a barbarian, where I don't have to fall into the stories of other people. Even the courier and the main character in Fallout 4, they really are people that exist in order to follow other people's plans, other people's goals. I mean, in Dark Souls 2, to some degree, you do that. In a way, you can't really choose an ending. There's, both endings are bad, even though they may mean different things and be bad in different ways. They're both, you really just have two bad endings. There's no good ending to the game. But with Golf, we see him in this beautiful setting. There's light, there's wind, there's that wonderful ambiance of emptiness all around him, this beautiful atmosphere in this game of freedom, of liberty, of somebody who was one of the great knights and now has withdrawn, and he doesn't care anymore. He's not involved in that world anymore. He is just relaxing, and he's retired. He's pulled out of the world and is just trying to enjoy himself. That's a kind of a very samurai thing too, I think. Of a samurai sort of going away and leaving a duty behind as an old man and sort of taking up the finer things in life, like art or poetry or painting or calligraphy or something like that. It just feels absolutely amazing. It's the most emotionally resonant moment in the entire game with me, even though I still think Solaire's a better character in a way. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Goff is the better character, because he just sort of takes the, it's sort of a moment not as powerful, but similar in a way to the fight with Maiden Astraea, the saint, in Demon Souls, where you say to yourself when you're doing this, you question everything that's gone before. You say, am I a hero, or am I just some evil fuck with a sword who goes around and murders people? Is there a difference? Do you have to be an evil fuck with a sword if you want to change anything or do anything or accomplish anything? It asks so many wonderful questions, and it does it without all of the big complexity of like a big BioWare story where they get all political and they get very self-consciously and self-righteously political about things, and it makes me gag. In this game, when you talk to Goff, I think it kind of makes you think, especially because you're in this later part of the game, what am I doing? I'm following somebody else's orders myself. I'm dancing to somebody else's tune. This guy's given up on his life. He's turned away from it, and he's living his own life for himself. Maybe that's the ultimate goal. The only way to win is not to play. That's how you win the game, by playing for yourself, not for somebody else. And you're not actually going out there. Maybe your ultimate goal as a brutal warrior in this game, or a barbarian, is to say, I'm not going to go out there and fight anymore. I'm not going to go out and get involved in these wars anymore. I'm going to leave it all behind, embrace peace and a life of comfort, and not necessarily comfort, but of loneliness and of avoiding the perils of the world that I'm trying to fight. Don't go out in search of monsters to slay. Just stay here in a literal sense, in this way, not the figurative sense, and just go out and live my life that I want, that I see fit. However, if I was a barbarian, it would probably eventually involve a lot of fighting anyway. I love Goff's body slam here that he does. He just does it, he does the back slam with the elbow, but also just slams his chest down. And he's also blind, you can see here, so sometimes he'll just sort of lose his focus on you and just kind of stand around gaping and not really knowing what's going on. I also love that his armor really does have dragon bones on it. It doesn't come across as well in your small version, but on his there, you can see on his shoulder, those are like the bones. It's like the vertebra of a dragon or something that he's worked into a pauldron, which is absolutely amazing looking. And, it just kind of feels bad that we're bordering a blind guy here now that I think about it, but, well, anyway, this was an absolutely magnificent fight here. I like his ending, just humans, there's really just no response there. And I wanted to get these because Goth's leggings are some of the only truly barbarian armor in the entire game. And you have to wait until almost the end of the game to get them. You have to fight go through the first 2 bosses of the DLC. And you don't need to kill Kalameet yet, but anyway, I'm going to end it soon. Have a good time, guys. I'm going to finish this series, I hope, as soon as possible. And I'm sorry for the rant, but I just needed to get that off my chest. Thank you.